This is CBS. The presidential inauguration. This portion of Inauguration Day is sponsored by the...
A shock, a seismic difference. Said one of the new freshmen, one of the freshmen who I talked to a couple days ago, he said that campaign rhetoric tends to be simplistic. You have to look at things differently when you get down here. I'm sure they are.
It's very easy, as Ronald Reagan has found out, to do all kinds of things during the campaign season, Walter. It becomes much more difficult during the transition period. Andy Rooney talking a while ago about reducing the size of the federal government. That was Mr. Reagan's aim, of course, and yet one of the things that's been a bit of an embarrassment to him since coming to Washington is the ballooning size of his transition office. 6 or 7 floors of people there. They ran over the budget. We'll have to solicit the private donations to make up the difference. I'm told the line for people who are lining up to give donations to that is one of the shortest lines. There's no wait if you want to give.
You know, we're talking about the freshmen in Congress. It's an interesting contrast, too, that the oldest president ever to be inaugurated in this country will be Ronald Reagan. But the average age of the Congress is at its lowest point in our history. The average in the House is down to 48. Just 10 years ago it was almost 52. The Senate average is down to 52.3, I think. 10 years ago, it was 56.5. Only the Supreme Court is older.
You know, Walter, you're also really going to be one of the different things this time. You know, we all grew up with the Democrats owning Capitol Hill. This was their part of town, whoever had the White House. And now the Republicans have the Senate, and there are enough of those new Republicans in the House where if you line up a few conservative Democrats, they will have control. And there's a whole generation of reporters grew up never knowing that.
I think the Senate is going to be the most interesting place in town, Walter. You know, I'm told on election night that Howard Baker, they were talking about he would now have 53 seats in the majority, and he said no, 51 seats and 2 cages. He wouldn't tell us which of those new members he thought would require the cages. We won't speculate on that.
But you know, even more than the reporters covering a story that they have never covered before, the Congress themselves, by this fact of their youthful age, means that the average birth date for them is 1931. So that you've gotten down to the point now, finally, that the Congress of the United States really did not know the Depression, the average, that is, really did not know World War II. Their experience is limited to post-World War II years in their adult life. It's got to affect their thinking and their outlook in some way. We have some more news from Tehran. The Iranian news agency Pars, still toying with us, I'm afraid, reported that the departure of the hostages is imminent, and then reported at 11 o'clock this morning Eastern Time, 15 minutes ago, that they would fly out within the next half hour. And that would be another 15 minutes from now. We keep getting those reports. And now the AP is saying again that Iranian officials have said that one of the Algerian planes has left the airport and that the second would be prepared for takeoff. A report actually we had a few minutes ago, but not from an Iranian official. The presidential motorcade moving now off of Pennsylvania Avenue onto Constitution Avenue, passing the couple of labor union headquarters. Carpenters are there, coming up the hill, which makes this Capitol Hill, at Constitution Avenue. They have about 3 or 4 blocks to go before they turn then in front of the Capitol building itself. They'll pull up into what is called the Law Library entrance, which is a small door, as all the doors are in the east side of the Capitol. You've always wondered how anybody get out of these buildings, except through the windows. If anything ever happened, the doors are so tiny. But they're coming in the Law Library entrance, then into the rotunda and on to the holding rooms. They don't go through the rotunda right at the beginning, but into holding rooms, then out and onto this platform.
It's a strange term, isn't it? It's a Secret Service term, I guess is how it came in, the holding room. It's where they bring a president when they're waiting for a ceremony to officially begin. One time during the Ford administration, Walter, President Ford was going to hold a news conference out on the lawn of the White House. So instead of having a holding room, they designated a tree, the holding tree. And the president came and stood there at the holding tree until it was time to go on. Still known to this day as the holding tree.
That's, I don't know where our camera is, but we've made Capitol Hill look a lot steeper than it is. I live up here, this is my neighborhood, and it really is quite a gentle little hill. That looks, you know, as if you could...
Looks like it was made for tobogganing.
Yeah, they have a pretty good time.
It's a pretty good crowd out today, Walter. Normally, you remember in inaugurations past, generally when it's so cold, the crowd won't begin to form up this soon. It will by the time the parade starts, but last year I recall when President Ford and Mr. Carter were coming up Pennsylvania Avenue in the limousines, there were very few people along the route.
Yeah, they hold out to the last minute for the parade itself.
It was colder 4 years ago.
Yeah,
nice out.
A great deal colder. This is an absolutely delightful day so far with the temperature in the 50s. It hadn't been this warm in 50 years. Lyndon Johnson's was the closest, and that was around 47, I think. Lem Tucker's outside the Law Library entrance we were referring to, the entrance into the Capitol. The presidential party's arrival, they're turning in now, you see, to the avenue there in front of the Capitol on the east side, and Lem Tucker's there. Lem?
Walter, the first segment of the motorcade, that is the motorcycle escort, the television trucks escorting the motorcade, has arrived here at the Law Library. This, of course, is the east front of the Capitol, home of all the former Capitol Hill, Capitol building inaugurations, this being the first one on the side of the building where you are. This is officially the back of the Capitol, and they will go in a small door here, as Walter said, all the doors here are small, called the Law Library. There is no law library here. It used to be until the Supreme Court moved back in the 1860s. We now see the car with President Carter, President-elect Reagan, Secret Service men, and the traditional running along the side when the car is moving this slowly, coming right here now down a small driveway off the main parking lot, coming up to this underground entrance. They will be met here by the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate, the Sergeant at Arms of the House, the Honor Guard now called to attention, the rear door being opened, and President Carter on the right side here, President-elect Reagan waving to the small crowd. You can hear some applause, and coming around to join President Carter. Thomas Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, and Senator Mark Hatfield, who heads the inauguration committee for the Republicans, escorting the two men. And it's just that fast. They have gotten out of the cars, passed under this small portico, and both Mr. Reagan and Mr. Carter are now officially inside the United States Capitol. Mrs. Reagan, dressed in a lovely sort of rose red dress with Rosalind Carter, escorted by Senator Robert Byrd, now the minority leader of the House. They are entering and vanishing inside the Capitol. We have the other people now, Vice President Mondale and Vice President-elect George Bush. Mr. Mondale walking by, and then rather traditionally, Vice President Mondale giving a thumbs up to reporters and smiling. Someone asked him if he could tell us anything, and he just sort of said no, not at this point, kept smiling, walking ahead. See Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Mondale trailing along behind, and now they too, with the Vice President still chatting. Now Howard Baker joining him, Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Wright, all disappearing inside the Capitol, where the inaugural ceremonies will begin not too long from now. The entrance back here so small that at one point this morning some of the honor guard that had come in to be ready sort of got lodged in the door, but that's over. Well, Walter, they are inside the Capitol, and before long you'll be seeing them, and it's back to you.
Okay, Lem will be picking you up again as the new President of the United States emerges from that east side for a military review, and then the motorcade back to the White House and the parade. The dignitaries have gathered around the podium now, for the most part, waiting for the next official entry, that of the of the soon-to-be former vice president, who will enter shortly. The dignitaries have gathered to say Phil Jones is there to tell us who they are. Phil?
Well, Walter, it's, as you can see, getting rather crowded here on the inaugural platform. Inside, you can see about 400 people who are fairly close, very close to the Reagan family, about 100 members of the family and close friends. Then you have the ranking members of the Senate and House who are here, as well as members of the Supreme Court. Also, you have the people who will be serving in the Reagan administration cabinet who are inside. Then on the outside, you have the overflow crowd, primarily the rest of the members of the House of Representatives who have come for this occasion today, and from the Senate. Everybody here is, of course, waiting for the Vice President to arrive, and then that, of course, followed by the President and the soon-to-be President for the 12 noon swearing-in ceremony. But frankly, everybody here is really wondering what's going on in Iran. There you see Senator Kennedy and this Senator Richard Schweiker, who will be serving in the Reagan cabinet. Mr. Schweiker, who was Ronald Reagan's running mate, or would have been his running mate, had Mr. Reagan got the nomination back in 1976. Walter?
We're grasping at any straws here this morning on the hostage departure from Iran, and we have a policeman at the airport is quoted as having said now that the hostages have taken off. A policeman at the airport. I wouldn't take that one as official quite yet, but that has been given to us by the Associated Press. The AP goes on to say that the plane did take off. Iranian officials now have told a reporter, but it's still not known precisely of that. We'll wait official word, but the word from the Associated Press now quotes an Iranian official that the plane with the hostages has taken off from Iran airport. The outgoing First Lady, the incoming First Lady have just come down the steps onto the inaugural platform. Mrs. Nancy Reagan and Mrs. Carter taking their seats. They'll be beside their husbands. The vice presidential wives, Mrs. Mondale and Mrs. Bush, preceded them to their seats and stand, and the inaugural ceremony is really practically underway. In just a moment, the Senator Hatfield, who is the chairman of the Joint Congressional Inaugural Committee, will be coming down the stairs to open the ceremony. Of course, before then, Vice President-elect Bush will enter. That will be any second now. Then President-elect Reagan. We have from our CBS News sources in Tehran a story that no planes have yet taken off, despite a report by the Associated Press quoting an Iranian official saying that the plane bearing the hostages had left. We had that about 3 or 4 minutes ago. CBS News sources say that is not the case. Back on the inaugural platform, Mrs. Reagan with her family gathered around her are now awaiting the arrival of the president and the president-elect. I don't know what that siren is we hear in the background. The Marine Band is still playing out in front of the platform here. Somewhere into our microphones, an open microphone somewhere, we hear a siren. But there's no indication that there's any problem up here in Capitol Hill. You see Mrs. Reagan awaiting the arrival of the president. At Andrews Air Force Base, Rita Flynn may have something for us. Rita?
Walter, the special State Department group that has been out here since about 10 o'clock was waiting in a VIP lounge until we're told they got a cue from the White House to board the plane that you see behind me. Not this one that's moving right in front, but the one behind it that will take them to Frankfurt. This is a support group. They have just moved out of the VIP lounge and are standing on the tarmac. A group of about 30 people, and appear to be preparing to board this plane. Now, once again, we were told these people would not be leaving the VIP lounge until they heard some word from the White House, until they were given a cue, and it appears they have been given some sort of a cue.
Back here at the inaugural platform, where you see there in Mrs. Reagan and Mrs. Bush, waiting the arrival of the president-elect.
They'll be coming out, Walter, with a congressional.
Here they are. We see them coming down the steps. There's the president and Vice President Mondale and Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. Excuse me, Bruce.
No, I was just saying, Congressman, within that's Jim Wright, the majority leader behind that.
This is President-elect Reagan and the chairman of the committee, Mr. Hatfield, and John Rhodes, who is the outgoing minority leader of the House of Representatives. He is now the former, I suppose. We have the new Congress in session now.
That shot, Walter, is, I think, in that little reception room. They use it for House and Senate conferees. It was part of the new East Wing construction a few years back where Governor Reagan is waiting. Since the protocol says he's the last one to come. Sorry.
They're running just a little bit behind the schedule that had been announced earlier. President-elect Reagan was supposed to have been entering onto the platform right at this specific moment, with the herald trumpets sounding, 14 trumpeters and a couple of drummers from the U.S. Army herald trumpets. But for some reason, a delay. I wonder what that could be about. Here we are.
The President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and the Vice President, Walter Mondale.
Whether you could hear or not, but President Carter was just asked if the hostages are out, and he responded saying, "Not yet, not yet." Walter, again, I don't know whether you could hear as President Carter entered or not, but he was asked whether or not the hostages were out, and his response as he walked by was, "Not yet."
Something like that.
Apparently that's the story. CBS has been told that the planes have not left the airport as yet. I thought I noted, Bruce and Bob, there a moment ago that Mrs. Carter seems rather grim at this moment. We've been told throughout this transition that she took the defeat much harder than the president himself and has really hardly recovered from it. It was thought that she had kind of brightened up a bit in the last couple of weeks, but she doesn't look very, very happy today.
Well, I suppose it's just one more straw, you know. Absolutely want to go out on a high note, and the high note was getting those people back. And, you know, that's one more thing that went wrong.
Right.
It's an interesting thing that Rita Flynn reported from out at Andrews Air Force Base a moment ago, that the people there in the State Department team had been told would not be leaving there until they had had some cue from the White House, and indeed Rita said that they were preparing to leave. But yet, as Phil Jones just reported, Mr. Carter said the hostages are not out yet. So as it has been so much of the time, Walter, we simply don't know. We follow
Here's
the
new Vice President of the United States, George Bush, 57 years old, successful oil operator from Midland and Houston, Texas. Fought hard for the presidential nomination, but and went right down to the last of the primaries in a valiant effort. He thought that he had unseated the favored candidacy of Ronald Reagan in the Iowa primary, the first in the nation, but from there on out, from New Hampshire on, it was downhill for him. He then accepted the vice presidential nomination handed to him by the president-elect at Detroit in that dramatic night when it was thought that Gerald Ford might be the running mate for a brief time. George Bush had already given up and was in his pajamas at his hotel when the phone call came that Ronald Reagan wanted him as his running mate. He accepted with, I think the word would be, alacrity.
Mr. Ford didn't come to the inauguration this year, did he?
No, he did not, nor did the other living ex-president, Richard Nixon. And Mr. Ford said, with the graciousness that is his, that he did not want to upstage the day for Ronald Reagan. And there is some other talk also that there was a feeling that if he came and Richard Nixon did not, then the Nixon absence would be even more noteworthy, and they didn't want that either. Here is Ronald Reagan.
You were talking a while ago,
Last
Walter,
few minutes as a civilian.
talking a while ago about how much younger the Congress is now. You know, Mr. Carter is going to be one of the youngest ex-presidents that we've had in quite some time.
Indeed he is, which gives him many years of activity, which will be his to decide upon, of course. Says he's going to lecture, teach, write his memoirs, but nothing planned beyond that. Fish, of course, as he likes to do, and hunt. But he may be in the position of...
Let's go.
Of some of the other young exitees, is there such a word, from this high office. He may get again into public service. Hoover, you remember, many years a publisher, wrote 14 books, I think, or something like that, but he did some major studies on world food problems, on governmental reorganization. He's the most recent who has been that active.
Mr. Carter, of course, has talked about doing religious work from time to time, and I suppose well, maybe that's what he'll turn to.
It could happen, of course.
Remember 4 years ago, Gerald Ford left this inauguration and went directly to a golf tournament.
Yes. Well, it appears that President Carter will not be going directly to any such restful retreat as that. He is scheduled to be named by President Reagan as his delegate to the United Press has sent a flash at 11:35 that the hostages are free. We do not know yet any details of that or whether it's official.
President Reagan, of course, could have paid the UPI bulletin. I think they'd be cheering that outside here, too, Walter.
Well, except for that little lady who was introduced to us earlier down there, I don't know that anybody's tuned in to events in the outside world. Certainly all eyes now are on the inaugural platform and the arrival there of Ronald Wilson Reagan, native of Illinois, resident of California, to be the 40th President of the United States. The United Press is now giving some details, although it seems to be written simply from the flash they got earlier. Tehran airport officials are the ones they are quoting as to the fact that the hostages have taken off after 440 days of captivity, 444 days of captivity. That's still a United Press report. We do not have that officially from Iran or from the United States government. We had an earlier report by the Associated Press, which did not seem to be true, quoting a policeman and then an official that they had taken off.
Mark Hatfield, Chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee.
And here the ceremony begins.
Will present the program.
Welcome to the historic first inauguration under the panoply of the West Front of our nation's capital. The 40th President of the United States takes his oath of office in a day when a tide of new hope is rising throughout our land. As an affirmation of this new hope, let us all join Michael Ryan of the United States Marines in singing a verse of America the Beautiful. Will you all join and reach out and grasp the hand of your neighbor? Let this be a symbol of our unity.
There certainly is a first. This mass singing to open it, America the Beautiful. a tune which the President and President-elect and Mrs. Reagan frequently have said and we have noted brings tears to their eyes.
Beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. In liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God mend thine every flaw, and burn thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law.
Please be seated. This new hope is not promoted in lyricism, but is tough and realistic hope, which is the instinct of the soul, the energizer of the mind. For our invocation today, I present President-elect and Mrs. Reagan's pastor, the Reverend Don Mumma of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles. Will you please stand?
That, of course, Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon, the chairman of the Joint Congressional Inaugural Committee, is presiding. And here is the Reverend Mr. Mumma.
Wherever you might be, here and in the United States and around the world, please bow with me in this moment of solemn dedication and prayer. Gracious God our Father, we need you today, maybe as never before. We have not lived up to our personal or national potential. We have seen our world from our own selfish, parochial point of view. We have lived as though everything depended upon us. We confess our sin and seek your forgiveness. In this historic moment, we would pray for our President-elect, Ronald Reagan. May he see himself as one who has been called by you to lead this country. May he take very seriously his accountability to you and do all he can to walk in your truth, run with patience the race that is set before him, and stand mature and wholly devoted to doing your will. Grant him a steady peace, a brave and compassionate heart, a single desire to always be quick to give you all the praise and the honor and glory. Help and encourage Mrs. Reagan and the children in these days. Teach them, O God, to understand that with responsibility comes sacrifice, and with leadership comes loneliness. May they all find their companionship in you, O God. We also pray for Vice President-elect George Bush, the cabinet, and all others who are in positions of leadership in this new administration. May they measure well the shortness of time and the length of eternity. May they see all people and things and nations from your point of view. We thank you, O God, for this moment of commitment. Give to all of us as a nation enough hard times to keep us humble and humane, enough tasks beyond our own abilities to keep us ever dependent upon you, enough joys and accomplishments to keep us pressing on and gloriously happy as we serve you together. We thank you, O God, for the release of the hostages and for all of those who have made this moment possible. And so in this moment of new beginnings, our hearts beat with a cadence of pride in our country and hope in its future. Help us to stand proudly as American citizens and face every challenge with a confidence born of your spirit and humbly touched by your love and grace. So to this end we commit ourselves, and to this end we pray. In the name of the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, even Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Please be seated.
The oath is now given to
My
Vice
fellow
President-elect
citizens,
George Bush. It'll be
will you
given by
please join
Justice
me at
Potter
this
Stewart by
time
his request.
in wishing good health and happiness to President and Mrs. Carter and to Vice President and Mrs. Mondale.
I think that Mark Hatfield is departing from tradition and conducting a program of his own, in effect, here with these marks the opening song, and now this little tribute to the outgoing president and the vice president.
I now present the Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable Potter Stewart, who will administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect.
As I say, George Bush asked for Potter Stewart, who's an old friend from college days and on beyond in their lives. And this is the family Bible being held by Mrs. Bush.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush,
I, George Herbert Walker Bush,
do solemnly swear
that
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
on
which I am about to enter. So help you God.
So help me God.
God bless you, George.
The band plays Hail Columbia, traditional musical tribute to the Vice President. That oath of office, by the way, for the Vice President is about twice as long as that to the President itself. Presidential oath, only 35 words. These oaths are the only part of this entire ceremony that is dictated by the Constitution. Nothing else is, no part of the procedure, simply that they shall take these oaths which are in the Constitution.
Nobody's ever passed up a chance to give a speech, though.
No, not since Mr. Washington first did his, Federal Hall in New York.
The United States Marine Band will now play our national hymn, God of Our Fathers.
it wasn't in the official program as it was handed me, I don't think, that we were going to have a brief band concert, band tune at that particular moment, that perhaps they planned it.
I have one schedule here that had the hymn coming before Vice President Bush took the oath, but I don't know.
Yeah. I think that maybe they got a little out of order. It may have something to do with the fact they were proceeding along at a pace which would have put the oath-taking maybe a little ahead of 12 o'clock, and that would be cheating Mr. Carter in an unfortunate final couple of minutes of his presidency. There's nothing that, there's been a lot of dispute. Well, you've read all that history and been a part of it as much as I. That long-held dispute about whether the president really has to take the oath at 12 o'clock precisely. It says that the term expires or begins at 12 o'clock precisely, but it's never been clear whether he has to take the oath to really become the president. Most of the constitutional experts and lawyers don't believe that the taking of the oath really has anything to do with it. He becomes president at noon, whether he takes the oath or not. But nobody wants to test it. It could lead to an awful situation if he took the oath at sometime afternoon. Something happened in that little interregnum there, and it became a court case. So they don't want to really test it, and everybody tries to make it as near noon as possible. And of course, there have been some cases in the past where they rush around and take the oath way in advance of that hour, just to be sure that there are no skullduggery in high places or that there isn't some problem with security.
Raises an interesting point that if the clock does indeed take precedence over the oath, then you might have a president in office who had not sworn to uphold the Constitution. Wouldn't be obligated to uphold the Constitution until he took the oath.
Right. In the Tilden-Hayes dispute, Hayes won the electoral vote. Tilden won the popular vote. And there was a lot of dispute about whether Hayes really had wanted and who was entitled to it under those circumstances. And Hayes sneaked around and took the oath a day early, just so that Tilden couldn't possibly sneak in and take the oath and claim that he was the president of the United States.
Took it twice, I guess, didn't he?
By the way, that's a terrific picture of the Washington Cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral, which has got to be, 3 miles from here? 4
at
miles
least
from here, another hill?
Easily.
Way out
And
northwest.
that picture is taken from a camera right up here on the roof of the Capitol. Incredible picture.
One of the highest points in the district, the National Cathedral.
One of the reasons this city is as pretty is the height limit. As you know, you can't build skyscrapers, and so buildings like the cathedral can dominate a landscape in a way that would just never work in New York, for instance.
Some picture.
The next order of business is the swearing in of Ronald Reagan. And I suppose this slight delay is to bring that as close to noon as possible.
The Chief Justice of the United States.
It's going to come a couple of minutes early.
The Honorable Warren Burger, who will administer the oath of office to the President-elect.
This will be the fourth oath administered by Chief Justice Burger because of that rapid turnover of presidents with Nixon and then Ford and then Carter.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Now, I congratulate you, sir.
11:59. Ronald Reagan became the 40th president of the United States. The Constitution says he'll become the president in another minute. He added, "So help me God." That's not part of the formal Constitution requirement of that oath. It has been added by most of the president's recent memory.
Took the oath, as I'm sure you know, Walter, on a Bible that his mother owned, and a Bible which contains a poem that she wrote, a sonnet she wrote.
Gun salute by the salute gun platoon of the 3rd Infantry Regiment based here in Washington. The inaugural address, we're told, will run about 15 minutes, around 2,000 words, written by the President himself, we're told.
The President of the United States.
He wrote this on a legal-size yellow pad with a pencil on a flight from Washington to Los Angeles, January 8th, we're told, and there have been very few changes made since then.
Thank you.
It'll be about the same length as President Carter's address, we're told, about 15 minutes.
Senator Hatfield, Mr. Chief Justice, Mr. President, Vice President Bush, Vice President Mondale, Senator Baker, Speaker O'Neill, Reverend Mumaw, and my fellow citizens. To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Mr. President, I want our fellow citizens to know how much you did to carry on this tradition. By your gracious cooperation in the transition process, you have shown a watching world that we are a united people, pledged to maintaining a political system which guarantees individual liberty to a greater degree than any other. And I thank you and your people for all your help in maintaining the continuity which is the bulwark of our republic. The business of our nation goes forward. These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions. We suffer from the longest and one of the worst sustained inflations in our national history. It distorts our economic decisions, penalizes thrift, and crushes the struggling young and the fixed-income elderly alike. It threatens to shatter the lives of millions of our people. Idle industries have cast workers into unemployment, human misery, and personal indignity. Those who do work are denied a fair return for their labor by a tax system which penalizes successful achievement and keeps us from maintaining full productivity. But great as our tax burden is, it has not kept pace with public spending. For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. To continue this long trend is to guarantee tremendous social, cultural, political, and economic upheavals. You and I, as individuals, can, by borrowing, live beyond our means, but for only a limited period of time. Why then should we think that collectively, as a nation, we're not bound by that same limitation? We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding. We're going to begin to act beginning today. The economic ills we suffer have come upon us over several decades. They will not go away in days, weeks, or months, but they will go away. They will go away because we, as Americans, have the capacity now, as we've had in the past, to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. Well, if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else? All of us together, in and out of government, must bear the burden. The solutions we seek must be equitable, with no one group singled out to pay a higher price. We hear much of special interest groups. Well, our concern must be for a special interest group that has been too long neglected. It knows no sectional boundaries or ethnic and racial divisions, and it crosses political party lines. It is made up of men and women who raise our food, patrol our streets, man our mines and factories, teach our children, keep our homes, and heal us when we're sick. Professionals, industrialists, shopkeepers, clerks, cabbies, and truck drivers. They are, in short, we the people. This breed called Americans. Well, this administration's objective will be a healthy, vigorous, growing economy that provides equal opportunities for all Americans with no barriers born of bigotry or discrimination. Putting America back to work means putting all Americans back to work. Ending inflation means freeing all Americans from the terror of runaway living costs. All must share in the productive work of this new beginning, and all must share in the bounty of a revived economy. With the idealism and fair play which are the core of our system and our strength, we can have a strong and prosperous America at peace with itself and the world. So as we begin, let us take inventory. We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around. And this makes us special among the nations of the earth. Our government has no power except that granted it by the people. It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people. All of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. Now, so there will be no misunderstanding, it's not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work with us, not over us, to stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not smother it. Foster productivity, not stifle it. If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. It is no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives that result from unnecessary and excessive growth of government. It is time for us to realize that we are too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. So with all the creative energy at our command, let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed all of us and then the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of that counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and opportunity. They're individuals and families who take taxes support the government and whose voluntary gifts support church, charity, culture, art, and education. Their patriotism is quiet but deep. Their values sustain our national life. Now, I have used the words they and their in speaking of these heroes. I could say you and your, because I'm addressing the heroes of whom I speak, you, the citizens of this blessed land. Your dreams, your hopes, your goals are going to be the dreams, the hopes, and the goals of this administration, so help me God. We shall reflect the compassion that is so much a part of your makeup. How can we love our country and not love our countrymen? And loving them, reach out a hand when they fall, heal them when they're sick, and provide opportunity to make themselves sufficient so they will be equal in fact and not just in theory. Can we solve the problems confronting us? Well, the answer is an unequivocal and emphatic yes. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, I did not take the oath I've just taken with the intention of presiding over the dissolution of the world's strongest economy. In the days ahead, I will propose removing the roadblocks that have slowed our economy and reduced productivity. Steps will be taken aimed at restoring the balance between the various levels of government. Progress may be slow, measured in inches and feet, not miles, but we will progress. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise. On the eve of our struggle for independence, a man who might have been one of the greatest among the founding fathers, Dr. Joseph Warren, president of the Massachusetts Congress, said to his fellow Americans, "Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important question upon which rests the happiness and the liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves." Well, I believe we, the Americans of today, are ready to act worthy of ourselves, ready to do what must be done to ensure happiness and liberty for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. And as we renew ourselves here in our own land, we will be seen as having greater strength throughout the world. We will again be the exemplar of freedom and a beacon of hope for those who do not now have freedom. To those neighbors and allies who share our freedom, we will strengthen our historic ties and assure them of our support and firm commitment. We will match loyalty with loyalty. We will strive for mutually beneficial relations. We will not use our friendship to impose on their sovereignty, for our own sovereignty is not for sale. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. Our forbearance should never be misunderstood. Our reluctance for conflict should not be misjudged as a failure of will. When action is required to preserve our national security, we will act. We will maintain sufficient strength to prevail if need be, knowing that if we do so, we have the best chance of never having to use that strength. Above all, we must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. I'm told that tens of thousands of prayer meetings are being held on this day. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free. It would be fitting and good, I think, if on each inaugural day in future years, it should be declared a day of prayer. This is the first time in our history that this ceremony has been held, as you've been told, on this west front of the Capitol. Standing here, one faces a magnificent vista opening up on this city's special beauty and history. At the end of this open mall are those shrines to the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Directly in front of me, the monument to a monumental man, George Washington, father of our country. A man of
It is with a heavy heart I give the American public the news of Ronald Reagan's assassination. Just moments ago he was shot and killed at his inauguration. He was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead on the way. Vice President George